one more week until the NFL season kicks off. Here to preview the season from a betting perspective, predictive analytics expert Ed Feng. Ed is the author of the new audiobook, The 60-Minute Guide to the 2024 Football Season, the Ultimate Betting and Analytics Preview. He's also the founder of the Power Rank and the author of the Power Rank's free weekly email newsletter. And for good measure, Ed is also the host of his own podcast, The Football Analytics Show. If you're not doing so already, you can go ahead and follow Ed on the platform formerly known as Twitter at the Power Rank. Ed, great to see you. Welcome back to Props and Hops.
Hey, Matt, thanks so much for having me. Welcome to the Big Ten, to you and your USC Trojans. I'm looking forward to, welcome.
I'm not sure how much I'm looking forward to it, but if USC can somehow go over 7.5 wins this season, which based on recent conversations with Matt Metcalf and Brad Powers, might be more possible than I had thought. I feel like even an 8-win season would be a much bigger accomplishment than some might believe. But long term, I feel like USC Michigan, USC Ohio State could really add some juice to a lot of the regular season in college football, not to mention an expanded playoff landscape where 1 or 2 losses to good opponents won't necessarily derail a team's season.
Yes, for sure. I definitely think these brand name programs are definitely going to add a lot to the Big Ten. I mean, look, we're headed toward these super conferences. We're headed towards more of an elite structure for college football. Neither you nor I could stop it. So we just got to enjoy it and enjoy these new games. It's going to be great.
Well, speaking of new games, before I possibly confuse any listeners who caught last week's college football preview, we will make sure to cover some good ground on the NFL. And to the audience joining us live this evening across Twitter and YouTube, thank you for tuning in. Feel free to jump in the chat with any thoughts or questions along the way, and we'll work that into the show where possible. Ed, want to start with the namesake of this show and go ahead and lead off with the props. You have become quite the expert when it comes to quarterback interceptions. So I think I've got a couple overarching questions to start, and then we'll get to a bet in this market as well. But first off, how would you explain how you've developed your expertise in the quarterback interceptions prop market?
Right. It was really a problem kind of in the past. So when I started doing football analytics a decade ago, I would have told you that turnovers are basically random. And even something like interceptions, well, you do your analysis of the correlation and you see that it's low and you're like, okay, well, it's, randomness plays a big role in these plays. Fast forward a little while later and, Matt, I feel like my role in the betting world, I don't think I have any new ideas, but I think I'm good at taking other people's ideas in the analytics world and applying them to betting. And I feel like that's basically the 2 things I mentioned in the 60-minute guide to the 2024 football season. On the interception side of things, I've always followed Bill Connolly. I've had the pleasure of being able to hang out with him as a friend. And, he came up a long time ago, 2014. So 10 years ago, he came up with this idea of like, well, let's not just look at interceptions. Let's look at passes defended as well. So these are plays which the defense gets the hand on the ball. You could jar it loose with a hit, or you just get your hand on it and you tip it. And it kind of makes sense that this is an important statistic for like defenders and things like that. Bill really pointed out that it's a pretty important statistic for quarterbacks. And essentially, like every time that a pass defended is a bad thing, and you don't want too many of them. And if you have too many of them and you don't have many picks come out of that, that's kind of an unsustainable thing. In both college football and in the NFL, when you look at the sum of interceptions and passes defended, those are all the times that a quarterback puts the ball in a dangerous situation. In both leagues, it's about 1/5 of those end up being interceptions. So for every 1 interception, there's about 4 passes defended. And it's a little eerie that it's the same ratio in both leagues, but that's what we see. And so I just started applying that idea to the NFL, started using the sum of those, and it's really pretty simple. You look through the play-by-play. You look at not only interceptions, but like interceptions and passes defended. And that turns out to be a really predictive statistic for a quarterback moving forward. So you can use what I call bad ball rate. So interceptions plus passes defended divided by pass attempts, and that'll give you a pretty good sense for what's going on in the future. In the NFL, I use about a 3-year average. I found that to be best in predicting things moving forward. Obviously, things can change a lot for a quarterback. Someone like Kyler Murray, who's been hurt over the last couple of years, his bad ball rate keeps getting worse. It was one of those things where I really wanted to bet an over on Kyler Murray. I just couldn't do it with his injury history. But I'd be interested to see how that progresses for the Arizona Cardinals this year. That's a long-winded answer for how I go about predicting interceptions, and it is done pretty well.
And we'll build on that over the course of this conversation, especially a bit later on when we go deep into the audiobook. But based on the approach you just outlined in terms of developing a niche, specifically when it comes to this quarterback interceptions market, how would you say that you extend that to your overall approach to season-long bets on something like quarterback interceptions?
Right. It's pretty simple. No, it's not. I would actually say it's a little bit more simple to look at the probability that a quarterback throws an interception in a game. It's usually about 50-50. So 50% that there are 0 interceptions, and then 50% that he throws 1 or more interceptions. And I've had that model last year, and that's what I work with these interception game props. It's a little bit harder for these season-long props because you kind of have to figure out whether the quarterback's going to play 16 or 17 games, and that really depends. That's really important, right? Because with season-long props, we know that you want to lean towards the under because there's a lot more ways that could happen. Player gets hurt, or players just pretty good at not throwing interceptions, for example. So it ended up being a little bit harder. It ends up being just a little bit harder because you have to figure out how many games that the player is going to play.
So in some ways, it's perhaps a bit simple. In some ways, it certainly isn't so simple. To make all this actionable, Ed, tell us about your forecast for one player in particular in this market. Let's look at Baker Mayfield's interception prospects for the 2024 season.
Yeah, Baker Mayfield over the last 3 seasons has had by far the worst bad ball rate of any quarterback that's had thrown 1,000 pass attempts. So he really had a good year last year in Tampa Bay with interceptions, pretty good interception rate, well below NFL average. But my analysis says that is unsustainable. And we just have to think back to the year before when he was a journeyman player, played for Carolina, played for the Los Angeles Rams. He had a really good year last year. I'm just not sure that he can sustain that. Will Levis has a worse bad ball rate, but he's a rookie. We don't have as many pass attempts for him. We can kind of expect some regression. So actually 2 bets on Baker Mayfield. I put this in the newsletter a couple weeks ago. I like him at 16-1 to lead the NFL in interceptions. I think that's an insane number. He should be the favorite. Right now it's Josh Allen that's the favorite at I think plus 750. The last time that I checked this market at FanDuel, Baker and Josh Allen should swap, really. So I think there's a lot of value. And Matt, I've been really struggling this preseason to move any kind of market. I sent stuff out in the newsletter. And a lot of these interception things were moving my direction last year. I don't know, nothing's been moving, which is kind of nice because I can grab it a couple of days later. I usually don't bet these things when it goes out in the newsletter. But I like Baker 16-1 to lead the NFL in interceptions. And then the line that I also like Baker over 11.5 interceptions. It is plus 100 over at DK. I am projecting him for 12.7 interceptions. And that's with a pretty light assumption of 500 pass attempts. So, for example, he had 566 last season. If he gets hurt, if he plays the whole season. Obviously, we don't want him to get hurt for either of these bets. We want him to keep chugging along and throwing picks. I don't think there's a chance that he gets benched because he's got Kyle Trask as his backup. I think that situation's a little bit different in Tennessee, where you have a Mason Rudolph as your second string quarterback to Will Levis. I know everyone is kind of loving on Levis right now, but we will see how that goes. I feel pretty confident that Baker Mayfield is going to play this entire season for the Tampa Bay Bucks if he's not hurt. And so I like both the over on his interceptions and then 16-1 for him to lead the NFL.
All right, to unpack a couple things from that savvy breakdown, I will note one thought right off the top. Those are obviously a bit correlated if you're betting Baker Mayfield to go over his interception total and to lead the league in interceptions. Maybe it goes without saying, but I always want to be mindful of correlations like that where bankroll management can come first and foremost in bettors' minds. And then, Ed, I like that you shared both of those bets because I think the interceptions over under are quite widely available, but to lead the league in interceptions, not as widely available based on what I've seen. So some people might have access to both bets, but if nothing else, at least the interception total for the regular season should be available to most bettors out there. Again, that's Mayfield over 11.5 at even money. And then one follow-up question is something you mentioned a couple minutes ago. When it comes to market influence, I think back to a market as big as the Super Bowl last year. It seemed like within mere moments of you releasing under 1.5 interceptions for the game, that was Purdy and Mahomes combined, FanDuel pulled that prop from its board. So there was definitely market influence at the highest level in the NFL when we're talking Super Bowl. At the same time, it sounds like so far this offseason, the market's not moving too much. I initially find that refreshing because it means that we might get another bite at the apple. After all your success last year, I wasn't sure how long that would sustain. What's your point of view on trying to make the most that you can of edges in this market, and at the same time try to perhaps nurse this along as long as possible before market influence might just totally crater the whole thing?
Right. I'm kind of thinking that there's a lack of market influence because some of the people I'm sending this to just aren't as interested in having their money held up for that long. Maybe their accounts have gotten limited at DK, crazy things like that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not necessarily sure that this market is going to stop moving. I think we will see the movement once we get into games and betting on single games. I think more people are interested in the action there. So, but I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe it won't move as much, and that would be great for everyone.
Yeah, eager to see what the season has in store on that front. And I'll hop in for a moment here. Ed, I'll want to get your thoughts on a couple quick points. I'll jump in with when it comes to props beyond quarterback interceptions. On a macro level, I think a subtle angle this season could be the new kickoff rules, likely to result in more returns and to improve average starting field position. I'm hearing from some people that I tend to trust with stuff like this. Average starting field position should be around the 28-yard line instead of the 25 after kickoffs. And also the clock runs on kick returns, as Sean McDermott may not have realized a couple years ago in that thriller, the Bills going down to the Chiefs in Kansas City in the divisional round when Kansas City got a field goal with just 13 seconds left. I felt like a kick return there could have bled about half the clock. Nevertheless, clock does run on kick returns. That could mean a fewer plays per game this season. Hat tip to Ron Marmolewski for that insight. I think the impact here, fewer yards available to gain from scrimmage and fewer plays to gain those yards. I'm not sure that's yet priced in. So all else equal compared to the past several years, I tend to lean under even a bit more on skill position players' yardage props. So taking that down to the micro level. I'll go ahead and pause there first before I get into a specific that I'm eyeing. Any reaction there from you on that thought as to how the new kickoff rules could affect the prop betting markets?
Yeah, I mean, I think, even if you're getting a half yard, if it matters to the extent of a half yard or a yard, I think that is definitely interesting. I just hadn't thought about it, so please continue.
All right, well, let's see if we can make this actionable in a sense. One bet I'd like to discuss, Travis Kelce receiving yards under. The number I was able to get here is gone, so I won't belabor the point with that price. But even looking at current odds, DraftKings 900.5, but heavily juiced to the under at minus 150. FanDuel is hanging 830.5 at a flat minus 112. And offshore, I'm still seeing a flat 865.5 at minus 115 to the over or the under. I think that flat 865.5 is still quite bettable to the under. And even at 830.5, worth considering as long as you're not laying any extra vig. A bit on the handicap here, Ed, beyond the new kickoff rules and that whole dynamic with fewer yards to gain, with fewer plays to gain those yards. I think with Kelce, To me, it's less about talent, although it could be reasonable to expect some sort of age-related drop-off. He'll be 35 by the time he takes the field for Kansas City's Week 5 game. More about load management to me, especially early to mid-season, to ensure there's enough gas left in the tank for high-leverage games down the stretch. Most likely, those high-leverage games will include the playoffs, which won't count against this bet. Looking at last year as an example, in the playoffs, Kelce got at least 6 targets in all 4 games, double-digit targets in 3 of those games, only reached double-digit targets 3 times all regular season. Beyond this, the off-field narrative, I don't think it matters all that much, but to the extent that it does, probably not going to help with Kelce's on-field production in 2024. And as a fellow podcaster, I can only respect his massive new deal for the New Heights podcast, but I'm not expecting Kelce to take his game on the field to new heights in 2024. So, Ed, what would you say about your point of view on Kelce possibly going under his receiving yardage total this coming season?
I like it. I would like to look kind of at where his trajectory has been over the past couple seasons before I would personally make the bet. But I've been all over this Travis Kelce getting old thing. Someone pointed it out at some point last season, and Kelce's always a player that's really used his athleticism to be the success that he's been on a football field. And when you start getting into those mid-30s, I just don't think it's possible to kind of sustain that level. Clearly, as a football player, I think you're going to get smarter in, some of the technical aspects of football, route running, so on and so forth. And, can he gain, can he improve there? For sure. But, I mean, if you're going to go any direction with Travis Kelce, I definitely think under is the right way to go. I do think the off-the-field stuff matters, too. Like the distractions, like I'm not sure doing the podcast is that much of a thing, but all the other things in his life and, the girlfriend, if she tells you to go somewhere, you're probably going to go there if you can. So I don't think that's a zero at all. I think Travis Kelce certainly going to be a success in life beyond the football field, but I'm not particularly high on him on the football field this year. I think the age is the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, and to your point, when we look at his track record, I've pulled up his stats by year going back a bit. I'll start with 2023, and I'll just rattle off the last 5 years, his receiving total from 2023 going backward. 984, 1,338, 1,125, 1,416, and 1,229. So clearly with his track record, looking at that data, that would suggest he might be crazy to feel good about him coming in well under 900.5 this coming season. I know with your data-driven approach, that might factor in quite heavily, but how do you juxtapose that with the age and the fact that sometimes we've seen with players, often with quarterbacks, think of Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, but beyond quarterbacks, other skill positions especially, sometimes there's not a linear drop-off. It could just be a guy more or less seeming to fall off a cliff one season over another.
Yeah, we're going to get to quarterbacks and age a little bit later. But, in terms of Kelce, like, definitely think that matters. One thing that I would look at, and maybe I will after we jump off here, is how much the Chiefs are into the exercise science bit of the analytics, right? Because they probably have some model that says, we need a little bit of load management for someone that's 35, especially with his profile, especially with the way that he likes to play the game. They just might work that into his snap count, right? Do you remember how many games he missed last year at the beginning of the season? Was it 1 or 2? It was definitely 1 because he missed the opener.
I think he played 15 games. I would guess that he missed 1 at the start, and then the Chiefs sat everybody week 18 at the Chargers. Still won that game, of course. So I think he bookended the season with a missed game and then played in the other 15.
I think that's right because I do think he came back for that week too. Yeah, I don't know if he'll skip games, but if I were the Chiefs, I'd certainly, I would certainly manage his load early in the season so that you have him at his peak in December and January.
And as we have this conversation with you and your Michigan Wolverines hat, I think back to a couple guests I've had on this show who did some great work together, Arjun Menon and Tej Seth, Michigan grads. And the first time I connected with them on Props and Hops, I think they had a great insight that just because a player plays in a game doesn't mean he's playing at 100%. So Kelce might play in 15 or more games again this season, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily a full go each time around. So it's not always the binary in or out. It's a lot of load management. doesn't necessarily get reflected even in a stat such as games played.
For sure. For sure. I mean, you can kind of look at routes run, but, maybe he's a decoy sometimes too. So that matters.
All right. Well, one thing that I had mentioned you said we'll follow up on later is quarterback age. And Ed, to advance the conversation and get us a step closer there, I think we'll dive into your audiobook very shortly here. But when it comes to team outlooks on the 2024 horizon, not necessarily bets, but as a thought exercise, maybe bullish and bearish outlooks relative to the current market. Starting on the optimistic side, Ed, I'm curious about one team that you feel that you're relatively high on. And to frame it up, if you were given a free roll on one team to win the Super Bowl at current odds, who would that be?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a no-brainer for me. I mean, this is the Buffalo Bills. You have Josh Allen, who is one of your elite quarterbacks in the NFL. And have you seen all these memes that, like, everyone thinks wasn't Josh Allen rated the most overrated quarterback in the league or something like that?
Oh, geez, this is where I'm glad that I don't dabble in too much of that off-season content. It doesn't shock me, but at the same time, that would definitely raise an eyebrow.
So, Matt, you have caught me. I've been on X too much, but yeah, apparently he was he was voted the most overrated quarterback in the league, and all the quants were like, "Oh my God, we have gone from like trashing this guy to hell when he came into the league to being his biggest defenders now." And look, Josh Allen's really good. So I like him. Obviously, we lose Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. You do have to account for that, but a lot of people I respect thinks that doesn't matter as much as people make it out to be. And that defense really has a lot of key pieces back. The defense was pretty good. It was pretty good. I mean, I like what they have in the secondary at the cornerback position, and so I really do think, they shouldn't be the favorite, but in my opinion, they shouldn't be below like a team like Philadelphia. I have Buffalo like 5th right now in my NFL numbers. This is market win totals. And then based on those market win totals, I back out a rating for every team. I have them 5th. I have them ahead of Philadelphia. I'm high on Philadelphia, but I don't think they should, for instance, have better Super Bowl. I think Buffalo should have better Super Bowl odds than Philadelphia. So, I'm seeing 16-1, 17-1 numbers like that out there. Yeah, I mean, I would definitely, that's my free roll for Super Bowl right now.
All right, we are talking a similar price range here and also similar in the sense of teams not named the Chiefs to come out of the AFC. My answer to this question would be Cincinnati, and I'm seeing them priced at 15-1 right now at FanDuel. One thing that I like about this, that 15-1 price, better than two of my most trusted market making books, plus 14.11, the price for Cincinnati to win the Super Bowl at Bookmaker, and plus 12.75 is the Bengals price at Circa. 3 reasons I like this. One, with Joe Burrow's return from injury, it seems like the news has been quite positive. I know he's got an injury history that's quite lengthy, and there are questions elsewhere on this roster. I think that's priced in when we're talking 15-1 for Cincinnati. I'm still intrigued by the upside of elite quarterback play coupled with dynamic playmakers at wide receiver. So just what Cincinnati itself brings to the table gives me enough interest at this price point. When we look at the schedule, I think it's often overblown. Strength of schedule can be very difficult to predict, but to the extent it matters, a last place schedule for Cincinnati this year, more likely to help than to hurt. And then a third factor for me, external factors across the division. The AFC North might be the best division top to bottom in the NFL. NFC North fans may have a bone to pick with that statement, but a good division top to bottom. Nevertheless, if we look at Baltimore, the reigning champs, they lose Mike McDonald as their defensive coordinator. They're seeing significant turnover on their offensive line. With a team like the Browns, also questions on both sides of the ball. We're still wondering about Deshaun Watson's health and just how good he is these days. Defensively, the Browns were elite last year, but defense tends to be less sticky than offense, and I think that means more downside than upside for that unit this year. And with Pittsburgh to round out the division, I really respect Mike Tomlin's ability to field a competitive team, but they're really unsettled at quarterback. I don't expect Russell Wilson or Justin Fields to pose a significant threat. So full disclosure here, I haven't bet the Bengals to win the Super Bowl at this price. Again, thinking of this as more of a thought exercise than anything else right now. But as my case would suggest, I have bet them to win the AFC North. I like the plus 165 price that's currently available at FanDuel. Also liking, again, that price point slightly better than what market makers like Bookmaker and Circa are offering. Any thoughts, Ed, on Cincinnati to come out of the AFC and hoist the Lombardi Trophy if it's not the Bills or, by definition, not the Kansas City Chiefs pulling off that three-peat?
You certainly have to like their odds with the healthy Joe Burrow. Their defense has kind of been up and down over the last couple seasons. I think pretty good 2 years ago, and I just looked last year; it wasn't quite as good when I'm looking at passing success rate on defense. So yeah, I mean, I would worry a little bit about what they're getting on the defensive side of the ball, but young quarterback with those kinds of weapons, I certainly think it's worth taking a stab at a future like that.
All right, so optimism on Buffalo for you, optimism on Cincinnati for me. Let's flip it over to the other side of the coin, Ed. One team you're low on, and to frame this one up, if you're given a free roll on one team's regular season win total under, who would that be?
Right. For the second year in a row, I really like the New York Jets to go under 9.5 wins. I believe the handicap is exactly the same as it was last year. You have Aaron Rodgers, except it's a little bit better because Aaron Rodgers is going to be 40 this season instead of 39 this season. I think quarterback age matters. Tom Brady is most likely a unicorn for his ability to play to the age that he did. Was it 43 or 44 or whatever it was? Probably could have eked out another season as a league average quarterback. When you look at Peyton Manning, when you look at Drew Brees, they were all retired at this age that Aaron Rodgers is going into. He's coming off the Achilles issue. I just don't think he can get back to the level that he was at 2 years ago. I don't think that is your mean expectation. And so I mean, they always have some nice weapons. They did some nice things on the offensive line. Breece Hall is awesome as a running back and coming out of the backfield. I also think it's pretty interesting that Garrett Wilson has had a league average yards per route run last season. So Garrett Wilson, I think, is a better than average NFL wide receiver. You've seen him make some amazing plays. But that number kind of has to worry you a little bit. I think you can kind of say, well, that's because he's playing with Zach Wilson and Tim Boyle. I mean, I don't think anyone should ever have to catch passes from Tim Boyle, right? That's going to probably mess with anyone's stats. But that was only a couple games. Is he the elite receiver that we thought he was? Well, I mean, I think he's got to prove that this year as well. Part of the handicap is that defense isn't as sticky as you mentioned. And this defense has been elite for 2 years. Sauce Gardner has been a huge contributor at the cornerback position, but they've also had a lot of health at the cornerback position. I think that's driven a lot of these incredible defensive numbers that you have seen. Can they stay healthy again for another season? We'll see. This number has definitely moved against me, but I'm seeing like plus 130 to go under 9.5 wins. I like that a lot. I think the handicap is just the same thing as last year. And I don't know if you remember last year, I bet it. Aaron Rodgers gets hurt the first game. You're like, oh, this is easy. And then, of course, they come back and beat the Bills in that opener. And like that looked bad for, I forget. I mean, it didn't look good week 6. Let's put it that way. Right. And then, things regress to what we would expect from a Zach Wilson led offense. And I think they won 7 games. I think the narrative is going to be a lot different this year. I think the handicap is really the same, and I like the Jets under 9.5 wins.
I might like that even better than the thought that I had queued up for this question. I'm going to go with another win total that will pay out plus money to the under. I don't know if I can be as convincing as you were, but I'm giving a lot of thought to Tampa Bay under 7.5. I'm seeing plus 115 at DraftKings, down from plus 125 earlier this week. A bit nervous to see that Circa is hanging the best price I'm finding, plus 120 attached to that under 7.5 number. And for that reason, this is just a lean in my book for now. The regular season win total market probably about at its apex in terms of efficiency this late in the offseason, but still think there could be some value in this thought exercise. And maybe this can be a nice nudge if you were already considering fading Tampa Bay. A lot of the rationale I'll share comes courtesy of Adam Chernoff from last Friday's Simple Handicap podcast. Offensively for Tampa Bay, poor success rate on early downs last season, but an unsustainably high success rate on late downs. And just like defense tends not to be as sticky as offense year over year, late down success rate tends not to be as sticky as early down success rate. So I think we can see some red flags about the underlying fundamentals of Tampa Bay's offense not being as strong as last year's results would suggest. Also for the Bucs this year, a new offensive coordinator introducing a new scheme. We can expect more 3 wide receiver sets and more pre-snap motion. That's music to the ears of lots of quarterbacks, but not necessarily to Baker Mayfield. If you look at his career stats, I think this dovetails nicely with your interceptions over bet, as well as the bet on Baker Mayfield to possibly lead the league in interceptions. On the other side of the ball, the Tampa Bay defense projects to be well below average. Overall, seems like everything fell into place last year, and the Bucs could be ripe for some negative regression this season. One more thing I'll add, looking at strength of schedule, same caveat from the Cincinnati breakdown, very difficult to predict how good teams will be, but Tampa Bay has a first-place schedule this year. That could make their out-of-division slate tougher than it was a year ago when they had a nice run. And in division, Atlanta and Carolina, likely only going to get better. I think that means tougher sledding within the NFC South matchups as well. So, Ed, all that said, any thoughts on Tampa Bay under 7.5 at plus 115?
That is certainly the direction I would go. I'll say it again. I think I said it earlier. Baker Mayfield had an outlier season last year. I think we're going to see him go back to what he was the year before when he was kind of more of a journeyman. And I think he plays, right? I don't think you're going to Kyle Trask or John Wolford. They also lost Carlton Davis on the defense, the cornerback. Definitely, I think, an important piece of where that defense has been in the past. So certainly, so I think at that win total, that translates into being 22nd in my NFL numbers right now. So they're 2.5 points worse than NFL average. That seems about right. And I guess to go under, you would need to think that they were even worse than that. I'm not sure that they're worse than that, but I would certainly lead towards the under.
All right, well, we've got some leans, some plays with some good conviction over the course of the first 30 minutes plus of this show. And at this point, I'd like to dive into your audiobook, The 60-Minute Guide to the 2024 Football Season. This is available on Spotify, Google, Apple, just about anywhere you get your audiobooks. And my first question would be that this is a unique format for a football betting and analytics preview. Why an audiobook?
There are no paid audio previews of the football season out there. And I think for a number of years, I've thought that that was an interesting thing. I mean, there's no shortage of written guides that you can buy or get for free. Just shout out to Cleve TA. I use his preview a lot. I love how succinct it is. You just one pager and you get a pretty good, it's cool because you can get enough to like handicap a team based on that. And I really like being succinct as well. Like a lot of things on my site, like I call my newsletter, I want it to be valuable, concise, and entertaining. And when I was thinking about it the other day, that's what I want this guide to be. I want it to be an hour. So that's the succinct part about it. I want it to be valuable because I'm going to tell you which quarterbacks might suck this year. And I hope it's entertaining as well. So, I don't know. I've always kind of wondered why there weren't more like quality audio previews for the NFL season. And I don't want to diminish like what a lot of people do on their podcasts, going through every single NFL team and those types of previews as well. But yeah, what I wanted to do, like, I mean, I wrote the script out, right? And so it's 10,000 words. And that translates into about an hour of audio content, probably a little bit more. Try to over deliver, right? When you say it's a 60-minute guide. But I really enjoyed the process of making this. It made me go through and think through a lot of things. I really enjoyed the first part is about how to predict interceptions, which we talked a little bit about. And I frame it in terms of Josh Allen. And it was amazing to go back and learn about Josh Allen's story and how a whole industry of college football professionals completely overlooked this guy. Just completely fascinating, right? I mean, these guys are paid so much money and you miss this guy that was 6'4", that was athletic. You could see that on the tape, and yet you still missed him because he was playing at these small high schools and these small junior colleges. So that was a lot of fun. And then, it was just a lot of fun in making this. So, how can you put together an audio preview? And the other thing that that kind of really pushed me over the top was, the fact that you can listen to audiobooks on Spotify for no additional charge. With certain plans. Certainly the plan that I have, I get 15 hours of audiobook listening for free. This is what my son and I do as we go to soccer practice 3 times a week. It's a really nice service. And, I don't really think that like an hour guide really works on the Audible system where, you can use a token to buy an audiobook. You're certainly not going to buy an hour-long audiobook. But now at Spotify, one of the biggest platforms in the world, says that, you can listen to a part of a book. You just have this listening time. I hope people take advantage of that. You can just listen for free if you have those certain Spotify plans, and I can see that people already have, which is fantastic. And I just hope it's something that's entertaining and gets people ready for the season. I just want it to be valuable, concise, and entertaining.
And digging into those 3 key priorities and the process you touched on just a bit more here, I was really intrigued by both the format and the production value. As you touched on, the format, 2 chapters, the first of which exploring whether or not Josh Allen is interception prone and kind of using Allen as a jumping off point into predicting quarterback interceptions more broadly. And then the second chapter, how to use the wisdom of the crowds to predict point spread outcomes. So interesting format there. Also from a production value standpoint, there's some piped in crowd noise at certain points. There's also humor that some newsletter subscribers are definitely going to recognize. I think specifically about your reference to Zach Wilson as the football equivalent of a DVD rental business. So Ed, from the format to the production value, tell us just a bit more about your experience and your process of bringing this audiobook to life.
Right. So part of it comes from my frustration from audiobooks. I think the delivery is less than optimal. I'm actually reading a book that my friend wrote. I'm not going to mention that friend right now, but like, it's not good. It's boring, right? And we don't want books to be boring. I try to bring a little bit better production value to it. I don't think I did the best job, listening back to it. I'm like, you could have done better, dude. And I'm starting to see like a lot of these performers, like some of these stand-up comedians, it's basically like they're yelling. Like that's the kind of energy they bring to it. And it seems like, I don't know, I'm still messing with this, but I think I could have done better from that perspective, but what would make it entertaining? Hopefully a couple jokes makes it a little bit more entertaining, and then just a little bit of music to lighten the mood, right? Something that you would, I just don't understand why audiobooks don't kind of put like music like you hear in some of these like a This American Life podcast. Music to just like play under people talking to set the mood. I often try to use upbeat music when I'm talking about something really mathematical or statistical because I just don't want people to fall asleep. So trying to trick them with a little bit of upbeat house music. I don't know if that works. You can tell me, Matt, if you had a chance to finish the whole thing. But that was just kind of the idea. Like, how do we make it better? These are things that I've experimented with on my podcast, the Football Analytics Show. Kind of my dry run was to do an episode on the team with the easiest NFL schedule. That was something that came out in June or something. Spoiler alert, it's the Atlanta Falcons. And nothing in my analysis has changed that at all. They have like by far the easiest schedule when you look at it right now. Obviously things can change, but yeah, I think it's an ongoing experiment. I put this out there to not only entertain people, but also to market my business. I want to give people an idea about how I think about things, how I go about doing the numbers. I mentioned at the beginning of the show, like, I think really, like, I don't really have any original ideas. Like, I try to be aware of what other people are doing and then apply them to the betting world. I talked a little bit about Bill Connolly earlier part of the show. I mean, who's crazy enough to think that like the wisdom of crowds is going to work for NFL spreads? Like, not me. I would have never thought of that. But at one point, I saw that Nate Silver was using the preseason AP poll in the his college basketball tournament predictions, like all the way later, like the subjective gobbledygook from sports writers that we make fun of all the time. I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. And he had the numbers to back it up. And so I just applied that to the NFL. Again, no new ideas here on my part, right? Like I'm kind of a translator, trying to stay solvent in my business here. How do I do that? Like I take ideas from others, I apply them to betting. And hopefully the guide shows you 2 ways in which I've been able to do that.
Yeah, that approach resonates with me because I often say on this show that I like to think of curation as my form of creation. I am not an originator. I don't have a model. It's just trying to identify people who I think are quite sharp in the space. And I think I have a good barometer there, and then try to distill everything down to digestible, hopefully valuable, if not actionable information for people who may be listening. So I totally hear you on that approach, and exploring that approach through the lens of each of the 2 chapters, starting with that first chapter, Josh Allen, gunslinger. I know you touched on the PowerRank's proprietary metric, bad ball rate, and how that compares to interception rate. And without giving too much away here, 2024 regression candidates based on last year's interception rate relative to the bad ball rate. Josh Allen is due for some positive regression, so think fewer interceptions. Will Levis, as you mentioned, due for negative regression, think more interceptions. Ed, from markets such as player props to team futures and week 1 lines, how does expected interception regression from quarterbacks inform your larger betting process?
I mean, it certainly plays a role. I mean, I'm certainly looking at that as part of, looking at an NFL spread. I actually made a list of quarterbacks which I project to have either a better or worse interception rate in 2024 than they did in 2023. So Baker Mayfield's one example, right? He was significantly better than NFL average. We just don't expect that to continue. That's certainly part of obviously this is useful for betting props, but it is definitely something I look at in my larger larger analysis when I'm trying to bet NFL spreads as well.
Got it. And when it comes to those quarterback interception markets specifically, to zoom back in for a bit here, I think it was just such a revelation last year what you did with the Power Rank. What can you say about your plan this year for members? I know you've already sent out some initial season-long bets, but beyond that, tell us about what's in store.
Yeah, I don't think I've actually told anyone about this, but let's dig into it. I want to look at sacks this year. I started doing some preliminary analysis on sacks, and sack rate for a quarterback, like the sack rate that he takes, is incredibly sticky. It is on the order of completion percentage and bad ball rate. Let's not get into our score values. It's kind of late, but what I found interesting is let's go into the play-by-play, and let's not just look at the sack rate, but let's look at how many times the quarterback gets hit, right? So and let's call it contact rate because that's my name so far. So let's look at sacks plus quarterback hits. Look at the rate per pass attempt. That's like double as sticky. It's by far it's like leaps and bounds more sticky than any other quarterback statistic I've seen. I kind of knew this because Josh Hermsmeyer had done some stuff, I don't know how many years ago, but I went back and checked it, and it's remarkable. So quarterbacks control sack rate, right? And so now, how does that impact your sack props for defenders? Well, it should. And so that's what I want to solve this year. So that's my goal. Yeah, if you're interested in following along, I can't imagine I wouldn't put it in 5 Nugget Saturday, just as I go along and learn. I was kind of in the learning process with interceptions last year. Fortunately, that turned out pretty well. It's always good, Matt, when you start winning before you start losing. So that gives you more confidence than the reverse when you start losing, and even though it's a good model. So, but yes, quarterback control sacks, and I'm looking forward to disentangling that in the 2024 NFL season.
That reminds me, when you speak about winning before losing in this market, I think the first time I had you on this show, March of 2021, previewing March Madness, and as a more macro question, during that interview, I asked you about betting advice to anybody who may be up and coming in the space. And I believe your words were something to the effect of learn how to lose, because that's probably how it's going to start. Learn from that to help turn yourself into a winner over time. So I think there's a lot of value to going through that type of process. But of course, if you can bypass it all together at the level you're operating with something like quarterback interceptions and perhaps sacks this season, then nothing wrong with fast tracking the path to success a little bit. And Ed, thinking about quarterback interceptions and maybe what you have in store when it comes to sacks, I think about something I learned from David Malinsky. We'll get into the Malinsky minute, of course, later on in the show. But one term Dave would use was meal ticket. And I became very fond of it because a meal ticket, in Dave's terminology, was a bet that you could count on week after week. And those types of bets are few and far between, and they're increasingly precious as the market evolves and trends toward efficiency. But last year, an example would have been Justin Herbert over half an interception, essentially betting yes on Herbert to throw an interception in a given game. I think you bet this 10 times before his season-ending injury in week 14 and turned a healthy profit, not so much because there's anything wrong with Herbert as a quarterback more than any other quarterback is flawed, but because it's all about the price here. And last year, especially with Herbert and some other quarterbacks, the market tended to undervalue their propensities to throw interceptions. So with that, Ed, any initial thoughts on potential meal ticket candidates for quarterback interception props this season, or perhaps from your early look at quarterbacks taking sacks as well?
Yeah, I mean, let's hope that the meal ticket of the NFL just underestimating this chance stays. Justin Herbert was kind of interesting because he didn't throw a single pick in 100 plus attempts in his first 3 games. So that kind of set where the market set the price for the rest of the season. And I mean, the prices were pretty crazy. So so that was a really fortunate meal ticket. Probably shouldn't say this publicly, but that changed in the playoff. All of a sudden, the market thought these quarterbacks were going to start throwing picks, like the good ones, like the Jared Goffs of the world. And so it was weird. We had a bunch of unders in the playoffs. I don't really know why. I can only guess, but the model was pretty solid again. So yeah, we'll see. I hope that the price to throw a pick is bettable in the same way that it was. I think it was really good for the middle part of the season. And then, I have no idea what happens with the sacks, but I think you bring up a really important point, Matt. And that's when, like, you build these models, right? And you kind of hope they work, and you never know if they're going to work, right? And what is really fun is when you have that one sentence statement, that's what you call your meal ticket, right? Like, the market is getting this wrong, and your model says that and can pick out the times to bet that. That's really it. And look, something like NFL spreads is just way too sharp for that to ever be, right? And so, like, how do we dig into other markets, whether it is NFL props, college football props, I don't know, college baseball money lines, but like, build a model, look at it, look at the market, and then figure out in a one sentence statement, like, where are the edges. I think that's the beauty in betting.
Well, you touched on it. When it comes to NFL spreads, it's tough, if it's even possible these days, to find that type of meal ticket. But in chapter 2 of your audiobook, you did explore how to make accurate NFL spread predictions. And I'll make another parallel to your work on March Madness over the years, because I understand that approach is big on the wisdom of the crowds. And your March Madness process has helped me personally win several pools over the years. So I'm wondering if you could briefly describe that college basketball focus on wisdom of the crowds and how it played into your approach for this chapter of the football preview.
Right. I mean, it's the wisdom of crowds means you take kind of a diversity of ideas. In this case, a set of sports writers that are out there publishing, either a ballot for a preseason college football poll or college basketball poll, or in the case of the NFL, preseason power rankings. And I usually grab these power rankings the week before the season starts. And then I simply map every rank to a rating, and that rating is dependent on what my numbers have said the last 10 years. And, in some sense, it's I just needed a better way of making some NFL preseason rankings. I didn't even think to check the accuracy of how these numbers did until last year. And then when I looked at it, I was like, oh, that's pretty good. I think the first 6 weeks of the season, it's 54-ish%. And that's a reasonably big sample size, like 2014 through 2023, looking at those games. Not surprisingly, it is not as accurate for the rest of the regular season. But then one of the great things about making this product was I was like, oh, well, before I had kind of broken up the season into the thirds, right? So first 6 weeks, middle, some weeks, and then the last to the end. But in doing this, I was like, oh, well, maybe I should just check the playoffs. And so that's what I did. I mean, I kind of had to go through and make sure I had only playoff games. The error in the preseason model is as good in the playoffs as it is the first 6 weeks of the season. And in no way should you just take this model, which you can get for free on my site next Wednesday, and just go bet, right? I mean, look, NFL spreads are too hard. But in no way should you ignore this wealth of information that the Wisdom of Crowds is giving you in the preseason. And no way should you ignore that even as late as the playoffs. And actually, it'd be interesting, like, I would love to see – this is going to be a fun project. Where I would love to see, like, I think in the playoffs, like, you probably have a healthy quarterback, right? That's how you got there. And for every random game in which Baltimore makes a playoff without Lamar Jackson like last year, you probably have a healthy quarterback, right? So I wonder what it would be, what the Wisdom of Crowds would be late in the season if you took out all games with the backup quarterback. And my guess would be decent. Like, it would still be a decent predictor of what's going on. So yeah, that's kind of how that came about.
It sounds like you might leave this conversation with a longer to-do list than you had when we started the conversation. So before it gets too unwieldy, I'll keep us moving right along here, Ed, and want to dig in a bit deeper on the Wisdom of the Crowds. And maybe this will be me playing devil's advocate with a brief line of questioning. First off, how do you reconcile using inherently and often deeply flawed projections to inform your bets against the notion of garbage in, garbage out?
I mean, I think every projection system is flawed, right? I mean, we could pick holes at passing success rate adjusted for strength of schedule, even though that's something I strongly believe in and do a lot of my handicapping around. I think any one power ranker, subjective power ranking, I think you could argue it might be garbage, but I think what this analysis shows is that a whole host of them is not, and you really do have to take that seriously. And not only, like, it's kind of really orthogonal to the way that kind of other people think about how to bet the NFL week 5, week 6, right? You're really not thinking about that preseason prior as much. You're kind of looking at the data, you're watching games. But I think the lesson here is like let's not forget what we thought about these teams at the beginning of the season, especially in the NFL. You do tend to have more continuity. Let's not forget about that.
Building on that, when it comes to this market, the betting market could be called a crowd in its own right, arguably a sharper crowd at that. Sure. So how do you decide when to side with a largely non-betting crowd of mainstream pundits to bet into the ultra efficient market that is NFL sites?
Right. Look, the looking at these sports writers at the preseason, like let's, even though it's been successful, let's call it what it is. It's a tool. It's only a tool. It's only one thing. It's one thing that I think you should take more seriously than you probably have been before. But in no way should you only take that and try to bet into the sharpest market in the sports betting world. I think you have to be much more nuanced than that. So yeah, I don't think you shouldn't just bet that. Let's just use it as a tool, just like any model, right? And I think what I've convinced myself of is, look, the model that you get on the power rank, the database stuff, that's useful, but let's just and I would say, even when I do my own handicapping late in the season, I'm looking at that a lot, right? Like, I have these tools where I can look at offensive pass efficiency versus an opponent's defensive pass efficiency. But let's not just forget what we thought about them preseason. Like, obviously, you're going to move that off that a lot. If the quarterback's hurt, if you have cluster injuries, so on and so forth. But let's not forget about that. That's still an important tool.
All right, Xander, thank you for the questions in YouTube as we're going through this. I hope we're doing a decent job of addressing it, but feel free to let us know in the chat if there's anything else we can help to clarify. And Ed, as we move this right along, there were also 3 examples you spoke to in the second chapter of the book, all focusing on Kansas City games last year, wins and covers at Minnesota Week 5, at Baltimore in the AFC Championship game, and against San Francisco in the Super Bowl. One of my initial thoughts, maybe this is the overly objective part of my brain kind of taking control here, but 3 games was a fairly small sample size, and they all could have gone the other way. And Minnesota, Snead not getting penalized for a seemingly clear violation, taking off his helmet on the field. In Baltimore, Zay Flowers losing a fumble heading into the end zone. And in the Super Bowl, Dre Greenlaw suffering a freak injury jogging onto the field after a punt, effectively unleashing Travis Kelce for the rest of the game. So how much from the outcomes of these 3 games do you attribute to that preseason wisdom of the crowd's model? And how much do you chalk up to sheer randomness?
I certainly agree that there's a huge random component. I try to be very honest about that in the guide. Look, it's always going to be both, right? I think when you look at the larger set of games from 2014 through 23, I think I can make a good case that you should take this wisdom of crowds pretty seriously. As a storyteller, I'm going to give you examples of when that was true, and then also when it was false, right? When the Chiefs completely shat the bed against the Las Vegas Raiders too. That certainly didn't work out. But as a storyteller, I'm certainly going to use those games to kind of motivate, give examples of why that's right. From a mathematical perspective, that is probably wrong, but I'm going to do it anyways because no one likes to just look at results, right? I hope to entertain with a lot of the things that I do at my site, and I hope the super hard math types can forgive me for that.
I think that's going to be no problem given your extensive body of work, Ed. And at this point, I'm happy to take you off the hot seat and maybe transition to talk about some cold beverages. Let's weave in one of the pillars of this show, the hops. I missed you at Bet Bash earlier this month, Ed. Plenty of beers to be had in Las Vegas, but you've got access to plenty of good beer in your neck of the woods in Ann Arbor. I immediately think of a spot like Holmes Brewery. Mm-hmm. To that end, what's been your go-to beer this summer?
Right. So first of all, Matt, thank you for posting pictures of hanging out at Bet Bash. I got to live a little vicariously through that on social media. So that was really great. So for my beer, we're actually going to go to Germany. That's where I was during Bet Bash, or maybe I was probably in the Netherlands. We were in Germany and the Netherlands. There, my son was playing soccer. I would not have missed Bet Bash for just a random family vacation, but there was a soccer thing he had to be at in the Netherlands during that time, so that's why we were there. When you were in Germany, we were in Cologne, and everyone in Cologne drinks Kolsch.
Yes.
And so when you are in Cologne, you do as the Colons do, and so Geffen Kolsch is definitely my recommendation for this part. It is so clean and crisp, and in Germany you have these purity laws, and you can literally taste it in every single beer you have over there. I was actually just trying to sell this Kolsch to one of my IPA friends in Ann Arbor yesterday. It's like, I drink ales, man. And I was like, look, I drink ales too, but when you're in Germany and you are at a game, and German soccer is on another level, Matt. We went to a game. I accidentally took my entire family into the ultra section, the ones with the flares and the flags. And no, you can't see crap of the game behind the flags. It's kind of annoying. But when you were at a German football game and you have a cold Kolsch, right? You're not stuck with the Bud Light that you would probably have if you were an equivalent experience in America. It's pretty awesome. And so Geffen is definitely the one that a lot of them over there. I had a lot of Geffen. It was great. So crisp, so good, and just a great experience.
All right, I think you're adding a new item to my bucket list because this sounds almost too good to be true. And I'm fortunate in Southern California to have access to a lot of breweries that, while they will be upfront and say it's not a pure or proper German Kolsch because it's produced in America, slightly different ingredients and processes, more out of necessity than anything else. The takes that I've seen on the Kolsch style out of Southern California are quite good relative to what I've experienced across the rest of the country. Ed, I would love to just ask one follow-up here and get your take on Kolsch in America that you had experienced prior to this trip, and how that compared or maybe paled in comparison to what you had on hand throughout your trip in Germany.
That's a great question, Matt. And I think it reminds me, I don't think I've had a Kolsch in this country for like a decade. Like, it's been a long time. This is not my go-to beer in any way, shape, or form. I'm an IPA guy unapologetically. Like, I want to say the last Kolsch I had was like from Trader Joe's like a decade ago. And I don't even want to guess whether it was good or bad. Like, I honestly don't remember. I think it was like a different era of drinking for me. So I'm going to, I don't know. I can't compare it to anything in America. I think mostly because I just don't drink that here in America. So just go over there. They love Kolsch in Cologne. Apparently, the German dialect that they say in Cologne is also called Kolsch. And they say that, like, you can't write folk songs in German because it just doesn't sound right. And, you know, think of all your stereotypical kind of German language things, but it sounds better if it's in Kolsch. And so they write all their folk songs, like the top folk song person over there, they write in Kolsch, and that's what the songs are. And then I learned like that at that FC Köln game, they're just singing songs the entire time, and it's not in German, it's in Kolsch. It's in like the local dialect. So I think there's like certain Germans that couldn't even understand that, much less the Americans that understood no German.
Yeah, well, it sounds like one hell of an experience, and maybe something I should have noted up front in my follow-up. But the Kolsch style, for the unacquainted, I think it's such a great style if somebody isn't into beer, or if they tend to gravitate toward Bud Light, Miller Lite, Coors Light, and so on.
Right.
If there's a chance to maybe transition to craft without something that's hoppy, a lot of people think of an IPA and they think, okay, this might be really bitter and it might do a number on my palate, and that doesn't sound so approachable. The Kolsch is about as approachable as it gets. My mom hardly ever drinks, but if we ever have a Kolsch on hand, she will gladly take it, even if it's not the proper German style. So, of course, getting over to Germany and Cologne, having the proper Kolsch, probably can't beat that. But for anybody who's on the fence about trying something on the craft side, but maybe more approachable in the US, the Kolsch is probably one of the best options you're going to find. Ed, moving on to the final pillar of this show, the Malinsky Minute, as a nod to the late, great sports betting legend, David Malinsky. I think that Dave had such a strong life beyond the betting boards, and keeping that top of mind as we approach the start of the NFL season. It's an exciting time. I think we should all be enjoying it, but also keeping in mind the importance of not getting overextended. To that end, I'd be curious for your thoughts on how you balance your anticipation of the season with optimal bankroll management from a betting perspective, and also with time management when it comes to things like that family trip to Germany, holding space for life beyond football.
Yeah, I think it's always hard. I mean, the bankroll management, I'm not sure is any different than it would be any other time of year. Don't bet too much and try to make plus EV bets. But in terms of time management, I think it's always a struggle. I think I'm never good at it, but I've gotten better at it over the years. We're talking in late August. The NFL will kick off exactly a week from today. And, it's a time that anyone that works in this industry is super duper busy. And, it's fine. It's the price you pay to have a dream job, right? And I would say maybe 5 years ago, I might have strongly balked at taking this trip in early August because that's kind of when all the stress starts. But I'm really happy that I did. And I think, I personally just kind of get a little bit better at it every year. Of course, I make myself busier and busy every year by changing up what I do. So the 60-minute guide to the 2024 football season is just one example. It's something I wanted to do. And at some point, way too late in the game, I decided to just go for it. And it's been great. I've really enjoyed making it. I've enjoyed the feedback that I've got from it. And I think it's a good idea. And I'm planning on doing it again. but it is also it has gotten me away from other things that have also helped my business, such as free stuff on my podcast. So there's always a balance. I think I do love that my job changes every year. I think that's one of the best things, like the new challenge of it. And but yeah, just dealing with the stress. Hopefully I just get better at it every year.
I think that's a refreshingly honest and balanced way to look at this and wrap up the conversation. To the audience, thank you for tuning in. As a heads up, I'll be back next week to break down week 1 in the NFL. Planning to go live Wednesday, early afternoon Eastern time with a handicapper you won't want to miss. As a programming note for the season, the schedule may fluctuate a bit pending guest availability. I'm aiming for a balance of consistency with the schedule, but also bringing on the best possible guests to make this show as valuable as possible. So in a nutshell, looking to have most, if not all, shows in the books prior to Thursday Night Football kicking off each week. For now, if you haven't done so already, go ahead and follow Ed on Twitter at thepowerrank and check out his work. The audiobook, again, is called The 60-Minute Guide to the 2024 Football Season. His website is thepowerrank.com. Look out for lots of good nuggets when it comes to quarterback interception props as well as sacks. Check out his free email newsletter from thepowerrank.com as well, and also the podcast, The Football Analytics Show. Ed, thank you for bringing your predictive analytics expertise right back here to Props and Hops, and for all you do across the space. Best of luck this coming football season.
Thanks so much for having me, Matt. It's always fun.